The wind carried a chill that morning, brushing over the endless fields of golden grass that stretched across Dry Creek Valley. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the silence of the plains was broken only by the creak of a windmill or the lonely call of a hawk above. Jacob Miles stood on the porch of his weathered ranch house, his broad shoulders wrapped in a faded coat, eyes fixed on the horizon. The first rays of sunlight split through the clouds, painting the valley in hues of copper and gold. Every morning, for as long as anyone could remember, he stood there at dawn, hat in hand, whispering a prayer. 3 times a day without fail, sunrise, noon, and sunset. No one knew why he did it, but everyone knew better than to interrupt him when he did. Life had hardened Jacob the way the desert sun hardened the land. His hands were calloused from decades of work, his face carved with lines of both time and sorrow. The ranch had once been full of laughter, the sound of a child's giggles mixing with the soft lowing of cattle. That was long ago, before sickness had stolen his little girl Anna, before grief had silenced the home that used to be filled with light. Behind the barn, atop a gentle rise, lay a small grave surrounded by white stones, always freshly tended no matter the season. Jacob never spoke of her, but he visited that hill every night when the sun dipped low. He'd built his life on hard work and quiet faith. The neighbors said he prayed too much, but Jacob figured he had reason. Some days it was the only thing keeping his heart from turning to stone. That morning, as he took one last sip of coffee, a distant sound caught his attention. A wagon creaking, wheels crunching over dry earth. He squinted against the sun. A wagon was rolling down from the ridge, pulled by a tired mule and driven by a figure he could barely make out. Visitors were rare in these parts. He set his cup down, wiped his hands on his trousers, and stepped off the porch. When the wagon stopped at his gate, the driver climbed down. A young woman, slim and dust-covered, her clothes worn but neat. Her brown hair was tied back under a hat that had seen better days. She looked around, cautious but determined, then met Jacob's gaze. "Mr. Miles?" she called, her voice carrying through the still air. "My name's Clara Bennett. I was told you might be needing help on the ranch." Jacob studied her for a moment, unmoving. He wasn't expecting anyone, least of all a woman, asking for ranch work. "Where'd you hear that?" he asked finally. "In town." "The general store?" I asked around. "They said you sometimes take on help during calving season." He nodded slowly, not confirming or denying. "You ever worked cattle before?" "No, sir," she admitted, straightening her shoulders. "But I can learn fast. I ain't afraid of work and I don't eat much. Just need a chance to earn my keep." Jacob looked her over again. She was thin, probably hadn't eaten properly in days, but her eyes, there was something about them. Not fear, just tired resolve. He recognized it. The same look he'd seen in his own eyes after burying his family and realizing the world wasn't going to stop for his grief. "The barn's got a loft," he said finally. "Ain't fancy, but it's dry. If you can ride and work the fences, I'll feed you." Clara nodded quickly, relief softening her face. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret it," Jacob grunted. "We'll see." That first day she set to work without complaint. Her hands, soft at first, blistered by noon as she hauled feed and mended the water troughs. By sundown she was still going, sweat streaking her face but her back unbent. Jacob watched her from a distance. She was untrained, yes, but she had grit. When night fell, he saw the light in the barn loft flicker as she settled in with a small lantern. He found himself saying a second prayer that evening, not for himself, but for the stranger who had wandered into his quiet world. Days turned into weeks. Clara proved herself in ways Jacob hadn't expected. She rose before dawn, helped with the horses, and even cooked supper some nights, though her biscuits could have broken teeth. Jacob found himself speaking more than he had in years, teaching her how to ride properly, how to brand cattle, how to tell a storm was coming just by watching the sky. She listened closely, like every word mattered. One afternoon, when the sun hung heavy and the air shimmered with heat, Clara walked up to him as he knelt under the old oak, hat in hand, praying softly. She waited until he stood before asking, "You do that 3 times a day, don't you?" He nodded, brushing dust from his knees. "Since before you were born, probably. Why?" she asked gently. "If you don't mind me asking." Jacob's gaze drifted toward the hill behind the barn. His voice came out quiet, rough. "Used to pray for rain or for better seasons. Then for my wife's health. then for my daughter's life. After that, I just prayed for a reason to keep going. Clara didn't speak for a while. The wind rustled through the grass around them. Maybe, she said finally. You already found that reason. You just ain't looked close enough to see it. Her words stayed with him long after she walked away. A month passed, and with it came dark clouds on the horizon, not of weather, but of men. One morning Jacob rode into town to sell some cattle and overheard talk at the saloon. The railroad company from back east had surveyed Dry Creek Valley. They planned to cut the new line straight through his land, the best water, the grazing fields, and right over the hill where Anna lay buried. He rode hard to the county office, dust flying from his horse's hooves. Inside, a man in a suit waited behind a desk piled with papers. "Mr. Miles," the man said, smiling thinly. "You've been informed, I trust." "I ain't informed of nothing," Jacob snapped. "You're talking about digging through my ranch." "It's progress, sir," the man said smoothly. "The line will bring business settlers prosperity. You'll be compensated fairly." Jacob's jaw tightened. "No amount of money buys back what's buried on that hill." The man sighed, sliding a folder across the table. "The decision's made. You've got 30 days to vacate the land. After that, we'll begin construction." Jacob left without another word, the paper crumpled in his hand. When he reached home, Clara met him at the gate, her brow furrowed. "What happened?" He didn't answer. Not at first. He just walked past her, climbed the hill behind the barn, and stood before the small white stones as the evening sun dipped low. His lips moved in silent prayer, shoulders trembling as the light faded. Clara watched from a distance, her chest tight with worry. When he came down, his eyes were different, harder yet calm. "They want this land," he said quietly. "They'll have to take it from God himself before they take it from me." Clara swallowed. "What are you going to do?" He looked out at the valley, at the wide stretch of grass glowing under the dying sun. "I'm going to pray," he said, voice steady as stone. "And then I'm going to build." The next morning, before the first light touched the valley, Jacob was already working. The hammer's echo rolled through the hills, steady as a heartbeat. He prayed at dawn as always, then went back to work. Clara joined him, not knowing what he had planned, but knowing somehow that whatever it was, it mattered. And for the first time in years, the ranch that had been haunted by silence was alive again, with the rhythm of work, the murmur of hope, and the faint, steady sound of prayer rising 3 times a day. Jacob worked until his hands bled and his muscles screamed. The rhythm of his hammer echoing across the valley like a heartbeat refusing to stop. He didn't speak much, didn't explain what he was building, not even to Clara. Every dawn he prayed, as always, standing still in the golden light, eyes lifted to the endless sky. Then, without a word, he would pick up his tools and begin again. Clara followed his lead, hauling stones, cutting timber, and fetching water from the spring. At first, she thought he was repairing fences, but soon it became clear he was shaping something greater. A channel carved through the dry earth, wide and deep, leading from the mountains down through the pasture. She didn't understand it, not at first. "You're building a ditch," she said one day, wiping sweat from her brow. "Ain't that a waste of time, Jacob? You can't fight the railroad with dirt and shovels." He looked up from his work, his eyes calm but fierce. "I ain't fighting him," he said simply. "Just doing what needs to be done." The summer sun burned hot, and every day the sound of distant hammering grew closer. The railroad men, laying their steel, blasting through the valley with dynamite and noise. Dry Creek had never known such commotion. The townsfolk gathered in the saloon at night, muttering about progress and money. Some said Jacob was a fool for resisting. Others whispered that maybe he'd lost his mind years ago when his little girl died. But Clara saw something in him that silenced doubt. Each time he stopped to pray, morning, noon, and dusk, there was a strength in him that seemed unshakable, a faith that didn't demand miracles but worked for them with his own hands. She began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a plan in the madness. Days turned into weeks. The ditch grew longer, deeper, until the path stretched from the hills down to the far edge of the ranch. Jacob worked by lantern light long after dark, refusing rest. His palms were split open, his clothes torn, his beard streaked with dust. Still he prayed, 3 times a day, always the same quiet whisper to the sky. Then one afternoon, Clara followed him up into the hills. There, Hidden among the rocks was a small spring bubbling from the earth. It was the only clean water source for miles, and Jacob was redirecting.